I'm Jake Skane, a senior at Melrose High School and a member of AP US History class. In conjunction with the Broadcast Durham class, civics students invited 4 candidates to participate in a taped question and answer video to highlight their stance on key issues important to our students. The video will be shared with students and available to a larger community on the Melrose High TV YouTube page. The questions were generated by our civics students and curated by a panel of high school students. The question will provide in advance, and each candidate will be given same questions and granted a total of 10 minutes to answer the group of questions. The answers may be grouped by questions. However, the candidate's responses to each individual question will be unedited. The order of the candidate's responses will be randomized for each question. Question 1. Why do you choose to run for the position at this time and in Melrose?
Sure. This is the most asked question that I get. People often look around and wonder why would you want to be on the school committee, but for me it comes down to this. The schools are the biggest department in the city, and I have 2 kids starting out in schools. One daughter's at Roosevelt, and the other is at the Franklin ECC, and I want all kids to get a great education, and I think my practical experience working government for over 20 years would come in handy. I've worked on policies and regulations, on many public budgets, and I have experience in government operations. So I think that this is a position where I can really step in and bring some new voice to the table.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for having me also, Jake. It's very nice to be here in high school and talk directly with students about things. So I am a parent of 2 kids at the Roosevelt School. I've got a first and a third grader there. So I have a very long track of Melrose schools ahead of me, and I'm really interested in making sure that we have the best schools we can have in Melrose. I've also spent the last 10 years working in public policy in the Massachusetts Senate as a legal counsel and as the chief of staff there, particularly a lot of work around education policy and education funding. I've also spent 7 years volunteering my time with the Community Action Agency of Somerville, where we run a Head Start program, which is a pre-K program for 3 to 5-year-olds for a little less than 200 low-income kids in Somerville. So I want to take a lot of that experience that I've learned in other cities and towns, bring it here to Melrose, and up my involvement in the schools here on the school committee.
Thanks, Jake, and I wanted to thank you for your interviewing, and to Mr. Daly and Mr. D for arranging, and to Roddy Manone and Jude for being here filming today. So I've served on the committee for 16 years, including 6 times as chair. I've led every subcommittee, and I've sat on many search committees and other district committees. I'm also the mom of 3 proud MHS graduates, so I know a lot of staff members. I understand the school buildings, and I understand a lot about the educational laws and regulations of the Commonwealth as they pertain to education. So with a new mayor, a new superintendent, at least 2 new school committee members, and many new city council members, I think I not only have a continuing passion for this work, but I really care about every single one of our over 4,000 students, a big number. But I also have the historical knowledge and the experience and the skills to be stabilizing, to be supportive, in our newly formed leadership. So I love kids, I love learning, and I love Melrose, so it's a really good fit.
So for me, to be kind of honest with you, I saw what was going on with the budget, I saw what was going on with the teacher negotiations, and coming from where I am in a career standpoint, I felt like I could bring a different skill set from the corporate world and sort of the ability to do multi-year planning and help to realize that. And that was really what I felt like I could bring to complement the team. And that's why now, and at least with regards to why in Melrose, is because it's an opportunity to really make a difference in the local community and not try to do something grand on a grand state scale where you kind of struggle to get traction and so on. This felt like a good time to jump in.
What is something from your previous experience that has prepared you for this position?
Yep. So I've spent the last 20 years always in these positions that try to connect the dots, everything from the budget to the plan to get there, to the goals we're trying to achieve, and then making sure that those get completed over the years. Unlike a lot of people who may do just the plan or just the budget, I've had that full cycle and I've always stayed in roles long enough, and I want to bring that experience here to the school committee.
Sure, without question, I think it's my background in state budget cycle. I've worked in the legislature, and their most important task annually is to pass a budget, but more importantly, I've also worked in state agencies where you have to implement the budget, where operations come into play and decisions have to be made. So I think I contribute to the school committee's work on the budget because I understand the process from the development of the budget to the implementation of it. And I also currently in my job today manage a large-scale vendor where I am in charge of managing its budget, its activities, and I think that would assist me with helping to manage as a superintendent.
So while raising our 3 kids, starting when they were really small, I volunteered at the Lincoln School Library for 9 years, starting with leading a great team to shift it from a reading room to a curriculum-based library media center, which included purchasing tens of thousands of dollars worth of books, and then leading the all-volunteer staff to support every class in the school for the rest of those 9 years. And then with a different team, I successfully advocated to the school committee, actually, for the first ever paid elementary library media specialist. So those experiences gave me a great window into curriculum, team building, strong teacher relationships, school budgets, and a lot more. And being in the schools showed me how much joy there is in teaching and learning, and the joy that's happening in every building every day.
Great, yeah. So I work in the legislature, as I mentioned, and there we've got to really collaborate with a lot of different groups of people to try and pass improvements to our laws and to fund our schools and to do the many things people expect out of state government. And that's really a key part of what I think I can bring to the school committee, is the collaborative effort that it takes to build community and to build consensus around ideas. We have a lot of work to do in Melrose. We always have that job in front of us. And that's good. I mean, we can do things like this to collaborate with each other and get to know each other better and figure out how we can solve the issues that are facing our schools every year.
What is your educational philosophy?
So this was actually a tougher question for me because I think to some degree it's not always the role of the school committee to have particular educational philosophies in a lot of ways. I think we have to listen to our teachers, we have to listen to our educators, our administrators about that, as well as try to collaborate with the community to build what the philosophy is we should be having here in Melrose. And I say that because, you know, I'm not an educator myself. I don't have a background in education. And I want to be humble about that and make sure I'm listening to the people that do have that philosophy. But I think if there's one thing that comes to mind, it's about meeting students where they are. I think there's a lot of different student learning ways, and we need to try and identify those and meet those needs for each student to be really successful.
I really believe that every single student deserves access to and support for high quality education, and that includes co-curriculars, so they can achieve their highest potential without labeling kids or putting them in a box. It's so unfair. Like, I remember my oldest son started with Miss Lord, the juggling club. So they had a juggling club, and that was really fun for them. So I thought that was very cool. As a part of that, everyone, including the staff and families and community members, should help each other be excited about learning new things. I think going into each day with a curious mind means being open to taking in new information and making meaning out of it, and it leads to other ideas. So we put all the ideas together. And so I think that's what makes school and work and life interesting, like learning new things from different people.
I'm a big believer in balance. So the fact that we're sitting right now in a TV studio, to me, is actually really important, because a lot of times we can talk about math and science, but the truth of the matter is that art and athletics and things like this are actually what really balance children and adults, and that's ultimately what we're here to do, to build the next generation of our society. And that's something you'll see me push for is in policy and budget allocations.
Sure. So I approach education in terms of how do we meet the unique needs of each student. I believe we should invest in our schools, their physical plant, robust curriculum, well-compensated teachers. And I think we also need to hear from students to get their feedback about the schools. So I think having the student representative on the school committee is incredibly important. And I also think we need to support our staff with useful professional development and get their feedback on what's working and not working.
What's your key policy issue or something you want to emphasize as a candidate for the school committee?
Yeah, so probably one of the top concerns for me is the budget and identifying our needs. We have had a series of budget issues in Melrose, really significant ones. And when we boil the budget down, it comes out to what we're doing to help students get to the best level of achievement they can have. And so I want to be clear about what our needs are on the budget and make sure that we are doing the best to meet those needs, and make sure the public also knows where we're not meeting our needs, so that we can come up with ways to try and meet those needs. So that is one of the biggest things on my mind, is working on our budget and really expressing it very clearly to the public in what we can do.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think the most important thing right now is to talk about the school's budget. And I think we can do that by having budget forums across the city to really bring residents in so they understand what's going on with the budget and how we're choosing to fund or not fund our schools. I think providing strong fiscal oversight of the budget and developing long-term planning is important, and then having a high-quality curriculum for all students to have the tools that they need and support the teachers need to do their jobs.
I think one of our biggest challenges is that we don't have a shared understanding in our community. And I know that can be somewhat abstract, but there are budget challenges, there are differences of opinions about policy and so on, but ultimately our ability to move forward in all of this is going to be dependent on us having a shared understanding about what it is that where we're at and where it is we're trying to go. Because just adding more money or just adding another program, it won't necessarily change the track that we're on. We really need to get that community engagement and community alignment on where we're trying to go.
High quality leadership is my number one thing. It has to have respect, it has to have real two-way communication, both listening and responding honestly, right? And a clear vision for the future. It's really critical to any kind of progress. We need really good staff, we need community members and student leaders to encourage everyone in our schools to focus on what's important and meaningful in the time that we have together, because students, as you know, are in school for 6+ hours a day and then do whatever they need to do, whatever you guys need to do before and after school. So, but we have to solve the problems that we have, and without those shared relationships and trust, we really can't do that. So we have to be compassionate and caring about other people, all other people. We have to have a commitment to what's happening in Melrose and our schools, and we have to understand and work to understand and respect each other, even though we may not agree with them. We can say, gee, Jake, I hear you, but I don't know, I might not agree with you. And that's okay, because I think, we'd still respect each other, and that's really important, and that's the way you make progress.
Once the budget is set, how do you plan to use the budget to improve education and in the schools?
Great. Yeah. So like I was saying, the budget is extremely important to all of us. It's really the job of the superintendent to make sure that when we set a budget, that it will be effectuated throughout the year to meet the needs that we've identified in the district. And we're at a point right now where we're looking for a new superintendent. That superintendent should really have a very strategic vision, because there's going to be annual emergencies, daily emergencies, weekly emergencies, where it just kind of can throw you on your head and really lose focus of things if you get too caught up in the weekly traffic of emergencies. So we need to deal with those. We need to have someone who's experienced with dealing with those, and making sure, though, at the same time, that we're moving along on our strategic plan, that we're moving along on making the investments, developing the programs that we're building into a budget. And part of the school committee's job is to make sure that we're making the superintendent accountable on those as well, to make sure that the superintendent has told us where we are each month on those types of goals. So if we start literacy programs, we need to make sure that we're progressing in those literacy programs throughout the year, that we're building on the staff that we need to hire throughout the year, that we're resolving issues that we're having with teachers bringing up things. We need to make sure throughout the year that those things are happening with the superintendent, and that's kind of the collaborative relationship we have to make sure our budget, which is a set of values, is meeting the needs of our students in our district.
So I tend to look at this as, are we achieving what we want out of the budget? And if we are, then we're doing the right things. And if we're not, that's a case where we want to take some time to maybe adjust what we're doing. For example, if we're struggling with reading and we're spending a lot of money on iReady, for example, well, is iReady still the best tool, or is that something based on the measurements we need to step back and say, maybe we need to reallocate that somewhere else so that we're getting the academic experiences that we're expecting?
So the budget has to ensure, first of all, that all the laws and regulations are followed. Like, that's the basic foundation, right? And then when we think about special education and some of those things, there's lots of regulations. Education is so highly regulated. We need to make sure we do what we're supposed to be doing. And we should also point to the strategic plan. So a lot of people spent a lot of time figuring out how to look to the future and make a plan to get there. And we have to measure as we go along and shift and change so that we accomplish what we want to accomplish. It should always be evolving, and it should also take into account new, how we evolve as learners. And it includes, as I said, everything that we talked about before, academics and other things, and we have to have a great environment to do that in.
So I think once we do get the budget set, or maybe before the budget gets set, we need to talk to the PTOs and residents of the city to really ask them what do they want out of our budget. I think we need to have public forums this winter and into the spring where we can ask people to have a back and forth with the school committee about how they want the schools to be funded. So I think that that's really important. And then I think some other things we can do around the budget is to ask our new superintendent, make one of the new superintendent's professional goals that they'll be evaluated on is bringing more grant funds into the schools.
What role do you set for standardized testing, such as MCAS, in preparing students for graduation?
So while it's not perfect, and it's certainly not the be-all and end-all, standardized testing can benchmark student learning at one point in time to help us understand what students know at the 10th grade level so that we have time to teach differently or more or adjust in time for graduation. So getting students ready for what happens after high school. Teaching to the test shouldn't be necessary since every student should get in the content what they need to be successful on the test. And then what I love is that students can explore through project-based learning and things like that, the content in really deep and interesting ways to them. And then they should be developing the skills and the abilities and the content knowledge to be successful on the test. So you need good teachers to do that. You need high quality environments, and you need people working together.
So MCAS was created in 1993, and the first tests were done in 1998, which was the year I graduated from high school. So I actually never have I never took the MCAS. So we have, I think the first time it was used for graduation requirement was in 2003. So we have about 20 years worth of data. And I know at the state level, the governor and others are talking about reevaluating whether or not MCAS makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. So I view them as a necessary part, a necessary balance in the whole equation. So I came from New York State where we had the Regents exam, which is very similar to MCAS. And I think that it provides a baseline of what students need to know. And I think that it's one element of it because the how and the why elements that we talk about in schools are important. But by having that baseline, it makes sure that we as a community, as a society, have just a common baseline of knowledge that's out there. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
This is a great question. I think it's coming up a lot. So I do think it's probably overemphasized in how we educate students. It has to do with, I think, how much emphasis is placed on the results of the MCAS and what that does to classroom teaching. And so I do think at a state level, we absolutely have to have a bigger conversation about the role of MCAS in our education system. We still need to make sure that we're tracking educational outcomes in a really standard way across the state. But if we're overemphasizing the test, we're losing a lot of things like electives and experimental learning, which is really, unfortunate for students and not fair to students in the end. And every time I hear about a student who loses their electives because their core courses are not going well enough for them, I feel like that's a really big failure on us. And we need to make sure that we're balancing the need for understanding where students are and also the need to give them a really well-rounded education, because electives are not just about fun. It's what people look at when you look at a resume or a college application. Those are really important aspects to say, this is who Jake is. These are the things that he likes to do. These are the things he's interested in. So, I think those are really important things to keep in mind when we talk about testing.
Yeah. As a part of the Melrose School Committee, what are you willing to change to make Melrose schools more accessible and inviting environment for all students?
Well, first I'd find out from the source of that information what elements of the environment aren't accessible and inviting. So I'd want to know, what problem are we trying to solve? Because you don't want to solve problems you don't have, right? You just want to solve the ones you do have. So then I'd find out if that thing or those things were at one school, a few schools, or everywhere in the district. And then what I do is I talk with the superintendent and find out if what I'd heard was accurate in their mind and get their thoughts on potential improvements. Then I'd think about who had which roles, because you have to stay in your lane. Like we can't do the superintendent's job, and he or she can't do our job. So we'd have to figure out, do they cost money? We'd have to find out if there were easy things to fix or hard things to fix. We'd have to figure out what the priority was in all of that. And then we'd have to work with different people to figure out how to get those things done. So that's sort of where I would start with the accessible and inviting environment. I'd start with a question.
So I have a couple thoughts on this one. I think one is we want to take what we've already done in terms of the ISM project, for example, that goes on here and continue with that and expand that as we see fit. I think another angle of this, and this came up during the Racial Justice Forum, is the fact that there is such a difference in the academic performance between Black, Latino, white students, low-income students. And I think it's really important that we actively address that, because ultimately our ability to just connect with other people is a lot of times dependent on just where we have commonality. And if we're so far apart, I think that just generally makes it very difficult to create an accessible and inviting environment, because we just can't connect. So.
Sure. So I think one of the things that we can talk about is really supporting students at their transition years. So the pre-K kids who are heading into kindergarten, the 5th graders heading into 6th grade, the 8th graders heading into high school, and then helping them when they make those transitions so that they're able to feel comfortable and welcome at their new schools.
Yeah, this is a great question, a really important question to the health of the student body. I think there's a lot of things I would be willing to look at. I don't have a full list of things, but if I start to hear about issues, I want to do everything I can to make sure those things are starting to get resolved. I think we need to go beyond inviting and accessible to real inclusion, and that includes celebration as well. When we talk about different cultures or different backgrounds, we need to really celebrate those things, not just kind of list them off and say we've talked about them. I think that creates a much more inviting space, a much more inclusive space. We also need to think about what's making it hard for students to access learning. Some of our buildings are not ADA compliant, so students with physical disabilities, they need to be included in our educational spaces when we look at the physical structures of buildings. In addition, we have a lot of kids with special needs in our classrooms, and we need to make sure that we're meeting those needs in the classrooms so that they can be fully included in our education here. And so, I think another area that we really also need to pay attention to is that we've got to be wary of people making jokes or harassment or bullying, and certainly any kind of violence that's put upon students, because that is not just a phase of life for a kid who's doing that sort of behavior. And we need to make sure we're addressing that behavior very seriously. And I think we're going to get to that in the next question, so I won't go on much further.
Yeah. What steps do you plan to take to keep our buildings safe so that all students and staff can focus on learning?
So I'm going to say something provocative, because it actually was something that came from, I believe, the Chelmsford district. They sent a message out to their staff a few years ago, and they said, in the event of a mass shooting, which of your colleagues should die first? And I thought, my God, that's a pretty heavy thing to say. And yet, the reason they said that was because they were looking to say, how can we protect students from, unfortunately, things that happen outside? And where they landed on that was a place where, in order to get into the school, you had to be pre-registered. You couldn't just show up. And today, I kind of just walked in, and I'm in some ways a little uncomfortable with that. And I think that's something which we need to take a hard look at about how are we going to make sure that we protect just from the outside, and I think from the inside as well. Each of us plays a role in speaking up if we see something that doesn't sound right, so that it can come from both sides as well.
Sure. So I think there's really two answers to this. What can we do locally, and then what should happen at the national level? So I think locally, I think one of the things that I've heard about is having more paraprofessionals and substitute teachers so that kids are in their classrooms and are learning and not sort of shuttled off into rooms where who knows what could occur. I also think we can educate parents and teachers through their professional development around recognizing bullying and how do parents respond to bullying from home. And then on the national level, I think we need to pass a national assault weapons ban so that we do not have these guns on the streets.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was going to get to a little bit more of this. I hear a lot about bullying when I'm talking to people out in Melrose. A lot of people having issues with it at different levels in the schools, and I take that very seriously. I think we need to really directly engage on this topic with all the families in the public schools here in Melrose and make sure that we're following our own bullying policy, which requires family engagement when bullying is going on. And to make sure that we are both protecting the victim of bullying behavior, but also we have a responsibility to make sure that the person who is performing bullying behavior learns and grows out of that behavior. That's a responsibility on the schools too, and make sure that we're working with families to resolve those things, because that has a serious impact not only on the victim, a very serious impact on the victim of bullying behavior, but also the student who, if a student leaves here thinking that bullying is an okay thing to do at times, that's a failure of our school system as well. In addition, I think we always need to pay attention to our school buildings. One of the issues that came up in the Roosevelt School where my kids are is that there was a locking system on the doors which wasn't able to function in the right way, and they had to prop doors open, which really raised the question of safety. And they came up with a solution to it, but it took involvement of parents in figuring out how we could acquire the right devices to make sure the doors get locked when an incident is happening. So, looking at school buildings as well to make sure that we're really making these safe places for our kids to go every day is really important.
So building safety falls into a number of categories: safety and security, regular maintenance, structures and capital planning, and good health. So for safety and security, I want to know that our school resource officers are building good relationships with students, are well trained, and that all safety protocols are being followed. I want to know that the buildings themselves are physically well secured and monitored. I want to know that all building-based staff are trained in emergency protocols, and that all are trained on bullying and harassment. So facilities and maintenance are shared service with the city and don't fall uniquely under the superintendent's authority. So for regular maintenance, I'd ensure that we continue working in close partnership with the DPW. For capital planning, we need to continue sitting on the school building committee and work on the upcoming capital plan. We need to decide if a new building needs to be built, and then we need to work with the Mass School Building Authority. And we have to stay abreast of the latest health protocols so that we know that air exchanges are good and we're keeping each other healthy with the rise of respiratory illness particular. Yeah.
How do you plan to form a strong relationship between school committee and district staff so they want to stay in Melrose?
So I think we already have many, if not most, elements of a strong relationship. All of our committee members enjoy and appreciate talking to all different staff members, including drivers, crossing guards, school secretaries, everybody who's in our buildings, of course teachers and paraprofessionals, but everybody has a part in helping all of us do better, right? So we have, thoughtful policy manual and professional development plans and so forth. And I will say that as volunteers, we donate a lot of our own money to financially support many nonprofit agencies around, like the Melrose Alliance Against Violence and the Melrose Education Foundation, and we think those really help teachers and other staff members. So, and I'd always be curious if staff members felt like we weren't hearing them enough. We'd want to know why and what can they tell us, because we are certainly open by email or phone or whatever if there's something going on. We definitely want to hear about it, and we really appreciate what all of our staff members do themselves to help us all.
So there's a few things on this one. I think one is we don't have a competitive pay package right now, and that just is a very difficult thing because it just means people are going to have that pull externally. That piece aside, though, there is just some of these nickel and diming things that we do. So I understand in the last week there wasn't any toner in the copy machines. A few weeks before there wasn't any, or shortly before that there wasn't any copy paper. Those are just things that just annoy people, and you add too many of those on top of it, and you get to a place where people just don't feel valued anymore. And I think it's important that we use our measurement of the superintendent and allocations of the budget to make sure that we're addressing some of those small things and then kind of build on those into the bigger things to build that relationship better.
This is a really important question. I think we've had a lot of hard times with this recently, and I think it's about direct conversations. I want to have as many direct conversations with staff as possible. I invite them to come and talk to me, and I would love to hear from them about what they think is the best direction for Melrose. And I want to have that relationship throughout my time on the school committee.
Sure, so I think this is really important. The next teacher's contract is up in 2 years. As you all know, we had a bit of a bumpy road last year with the teacher's contract. So I think we need to start planning today through having community conversations about what do we want to pay our teachers, how do we want our teachers' working conditions to be, so that the school committee and the public are kind of on the same page when they go into the next negotiations.
How do you plan to ensure the students' voices are being considered during the decision-making process?
This is an excellent question. I think this is number one. We can do things like this. More of this is excellent. But I also think we should talk about having a budget hearing at the schools, and in particular during the school day. I would love to hear directly from students. I know that the mayor's office has been pursuing some participatory budgeting for the citywide budget, but maybe we can think about that for the school budget as well, some element of that. But I really think it would be a great, excellent learning experience for students of all ages to have the chance to come before the school committee during their school day and advocate for the needs of their schools and the things that they're interested in. I would certainly love to hear that, and I think that's a great opportunity for students to learn.
So we currently have 2 committee members who work with our student reps to use their voices during school committee discussions. We also welcome any and all students who want to speak at public comment, of course. As part of the current superintendent search, we invited applications from students to sit on the screening committee to help us hear their voices. And we participate in civic action projects. And one of last year's recommendations resulted in a policy change at Melrose High, which was awesome. So if students have additional ideas, we'd love to hear about them and love to talk to students. Went to a lot of sporting events and everything else, love to talk to students.
So I think we have an opportunity here really with the student representatives. I know right now when I listen to them at the school committee meetings, they share kind of just the general things that are going on, but I think we have an opportunity to go deeper into what are the specific challenges that you as students see and feedback that you want to give directly on that to the school committee, whether that be via the representative or whether there's a survey or some other mechanism. I think that's an opportunity we have to build on that and get more input that we don't always get.
Sure, I'd actually like to hear more from students about how they think their voices could be heard. There is currently the student representatives to the school committee, so I think that's incredibly important. But I'd kind of like to understand, if I get elected, where there are ways that students would want to get more engaged. One thing that we could do is have age-appropriate surveys for students to fill out to give us, to give the schools some understanding of how get the students' voice into the school committee.